This week on Motoring 97, we look at the past, present, and future as we meet the leanest, meanest cat on the street.
TSN's Motoring 97 is brought to you by Quaker State. The big Q stands for quality, always has, always will. And Midas, the way it should be.
Well, this week we're in Santa Barbara in Southern California, the state that has been such a trendsetter for so many years, whether it's clothes, food, or even cars. Well, California is the state that Jaguar has selected to introduce its first sports car in 21 years. And I'm driving it. It's the XK8, and it's powered by Jaguar's first ever V8. Well, as we've discovered out here, Jaguar would be thrilled if the XK8 is even half the trendsetter that its granddaddy was.
On behalf of all the employees of Jaguar Cars, it gives me great pleasure to ask you to join with me and welcome, for the first time, the new XK8 convertible.
The XK8 replaces the XJS, which is retiring after 21 years and has the honor of being Jaguar's best-selling sports car with over 115,000 sold. But despite its success, the XJS was not the inspiration for the design team that set out to create the XK8.
Well, when we started XK8, Brad, we looked at about 4 different designs, 4 different concepts. One of them, in fact, took the XJS, the character of the XJS, and looked at bringing it into the 1990s. Most of the other designs we did were quite evolutionary in spirit. One design was really quite radical, quite avant-garde. Our own views within the company were very clear. We wanted a spiritual successor to the E-Type. The market research that we carried out confirmed that, no surprises there. So it was fairly straightforward to select a theme that honored the spirit of Jaguar's sports cars from the 1960s.
Our owners and the people who buy Jaguars expect certain things. They expect high style, drop-dead gorgeous looks. They expect a lot of wood and leather and very stylish interiors. And we have been true to our past. I mean, the car does honor our past in so many ways. But it's also very much a car for the future, because we do live in a competitive world. And we can't just sell wood and leather and good looks. We do have to sell quality, reliability, performance, extraordinary ride and handling, for which Jaguar is well known. And I think the car has sort of come together very well and honors our past, but actually projects the company forward in a very positive way.
I think Jaguars have always had a sense of integrity, a completeness about them, and we approached XK8 as an entity, a complete entity. So I think we're very cautious in ensuring that we don't lose sight of the heritage and the pedigree. That's the most important aspect of XK8, that the DNA, the genetics of Jaguar style have, in my opinion, and hopefully yours, been protected.
The XK8 is powered by the first V8 engine ever designed by Jaguar. Called the AJ V8, the 4-liter, 32-valve engine is manufactured in a new, dedicated facility in the UK.
Looking at what we needed for our customers, it was clear that a 4-liter V8, a new technology, a next generation, was going to be important, really, as a foundation for our future. The engine produces 290 brake horsepower and 290 pounds-feet of torque, which is really a best-in-class for the luxury market.
The thing about this Jaguar is that you'll see the ads on television and you will be attracted by the car. You will then go to the showroom and you will see the car in the metal, and the car will not disappoint. the car is absolutely as gorgeous as it will look in a television commercial. And then you get behind the wheel. And then it's a different story. The car is an outstanding performance car. It's going to sell us a lot of cars. The Canadian company will be selling around 350 of them in the first model year, which in that particular segment of the market is an outstanding performance. I think it will set the company alight in terms of what it says to people about the company, about the kind of cars that we want to make. The XJR did that on the sedan side. It created a lot of excitement, and I think this car will add to that excitement and say a lot that Jaguar has changed. And Jaguar has indeed changed, and it's changed so much for the better.
On the surface, you could be forgiven for thinking that the suspension on this new Tiburon might be rather wishy-washy because of the McPherson struts up front and a double-link system in back. However, there is an intangible that's got to be factored in. Now, you know what? It works. When Hyundai first came to Canada, their product was, to be quite frank, rather sad. Then they bucked the trend with the introduction of the Accent and Elantra. With them came respectability. Well, just as every other manufacturer seems to be getting out of the sports car business, Hyundai are bucking that trend with the introduction of the 97 Tiburon.
Power for the Tiburon comes from one of two engines. The base model gets a 130 horse 1.8 litre unit, while our FX Tester benefits from a larger 2-litre version that ups the ante by 10 horsepower and torque rises from 122 to a respectable 133 at 4800. These numbers come thanks to some decent technology. As well as the usual 16 valves, twin camshafts, fuel injection and direct ignition, the Beta engine uses a pent-roof combustion chamber and silicone impregnated pistons. The latter cuts down on friction and ultimately wear. On the skid pad, the engine turned in respectable numbers, requiring just 8.5 seconds to eclipse the 100k mark. Around town, response to throttle inputs is quick and passing power plentiful. Much of the credit for the engine showing goes down to the transmission. The ratios allow the driver to reach 100 km an hour in second gear, despite the whopping drop between first and second, and yet you can cruise the highway at a relaxed 2800 RPM. I'll have more to say on the transmission later.
So why would a car company go to the expense of adding a boss that is at the moment redundant? The answer is surprisingly simple. Down the road, you're going to see this Beta engine offered with variable valve timing. They've got access to the oil gallery. All they need is the hardware.
One of Hyundai's strong points has always been the brake system. The four-wheel disc brake setup on the FX did not disappoint. The stops are short, measuring just 115 feet from 80k, and the pedal is easily modulated. The latter is particularly handy because it allows you to find the threshold quickly. ABS is an available option. Hyundai come up short on this one because it should be standard, especially on the upscale FX version.
On the surface, you'd expect the suspension in this vehicle to be rather mundane because when you check the spec sheet, it says McPherson struts up front and a dual-link system in rear. Well, you could be deceived because there's an intangible built into the system, and that is the influence that Porsche had over the design. They were the ones that did all of the settings for the damping and spring characteristics. The result is a very tight and taut feel, and none of the things that you expect from a vehicle of this price category. We almost lost it that time.
A stiffer chassis, Michelin 195 60/14 tyres and a progressive power-assisted rack and pinion system all contribute to the final feel. While the Tiburon does run into understeer, it occurs at a point well beyond anything that would be attempted on public highways, or at least I hope it does.
There are three things that irk me about the interior of the Tiburon. The first one, there's no tether on the mat, which means it slides up underneath the pedals, and that's never a good thing at any time. The second thing is the gear lever. It's very notchy and numb and not at all in keeping with the tight character of the rest of the car. The third thing, the radio. It's still too low down in the dash.
Inside, the rounded shark-like look continues with barely a straight line in sight. Boy, talk about your French curve exercise. That aside, the seats are form-fitting, the dash eminently readable and reachable, and despite the 2+2 configuration, there is reasonable room in the rear. Getting back there, however, is another story.
The Tiburon is a truly surprising little car. First of all, Hyundai have kept it very close to its conceptual roots, although if you were paying attention during test drive, you will have picked out more than the little Pontiac Sunfire in the rear end design. It's got a good engine, a great suspension. In short, Hyundai have taken their first step in realizing their ambition, and that is to become one of the top 10 auto manufacturers in the world before the end of this century.
Well, it's a 1959 Cadillac, and it's pink. And generally, the 1959 Cadillac is a collectible car around the world. And it's because it represents the height of the tailfin era. Through the 50s, the tailfin wars began by Cadillac, and then everybody joined the fray. And then Cadillac took it to its ultimate, and they never got that high again. After that, the wars were over, and most cars started dropping them. So Cadillac with the tallest fins, the 59, becomes special. In the late 50s, we have the jet age beginning. Boeing 707s are coming out and they're starting to fly, and it's really captured the public imagination. So the car companies aren't stupid, and so they picked up on jet styling themes for automobiles. The front parking lights look like air intakes off a 707. In the rear end, you've got tail lights that look like flames coming out, and the backup lights look like an exhaust port off a jet airplane. It was just the popular vogue, and it sold cars. It's got a 390 cubic inch engine with 325 horsepower. It's a powerful engine, but then it's a heavy car. It's about 5,000 pounds. So it needs all of that horsepower to get it moving. Well, the problem is that they're being sold overseas. They're very popular around the world because it's something of an American icon, an icon for cars, and they're being imported to Germany and Sweden and Italy, Austria, Japan, Australia. Recently I was at an auction where a collection of 15 59 Cadillacs were sold and 13 went overseas. It's just a very popular car to own abroad. I think, too, if you think about the history of it, after the war, most of the great automobile countries weren't building very good cars, except for America. So if you want a great 1950s car, it almost has to be American.
What did it cost in 1959, and what kind of check would I have to write you to get it out of your hands today?
It cost $5,700 in 1959, and it would take about $25,000 today.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns loss of tire pressure. If you notice a condition like this, an object puncturing one of your tires, that's obviously a defect you need to remedy as soon as possible. And in the interim, keep the tire pressure up to spec because it's going to decline quickly. However, what a lot of people don't realize is the fact that tire pressure does decline. It's a normal condition for it to decline in the fall and winter with dropping ambient temperatures, and that's something you need to compensate for. One of the most dramatic changes can occur between a heated shop and outside. For example, it's 60 degrees or more inside the car repair shop and maybe 0 or less outside. And that dramatic shift in ambient temperature can cause the tire to lose quite a bit of inflation pressure, and that's totally normal. That's why we adjust it outside and with the tire cold. That's your Midas tip of the week.
A portion of Motoring 97 is brought to you by the Solder Seal Gunk family of automotive products, makers of Puncture Seal Gold and Liquid Wrench.
It's a 1914 Ronch & Lang all-electric car. It's battery-powered. It has 14 6-volt batteries connected in series. The batteries weigh approximately 1,200 pounds altogether. It gives it the range of about 30 miles and a top speed of about 22 miles an hour. It has 6 forward speeds, 3 reverse speeds, and the headlights operate on a 90-volt system.
Where's the steering wheel?
There is no steering wheel. This operates off of a tiller mechanism, similar to a sailboat. Push forward to go left, pull back to go right.
You have seats in front of you.
Two passengers ride to the front, and one passenger can ride here.
Doesn't that obstruct your view? Or
Not at all. Not at all. They're off to the side. You're sitting center. You can see right through. This vehicle is designed to be called a touring car with all the glass enclosures, so you can look all the way around as you're driving and get a view of everything.
Why in 1914 would they be even thinking of electric?
Well, primarily the vehicle of this nature was used for the elite of society, so to speak, the rich. It gave the women the ability to go out and travel and do their social functions because they couldn't crank power start the regular automobiles at that time. They could get into this car and basically turn the key and use the throttle, the accelerator, and go. So it was a convenience device for the women of the period. Science is definitely going to on the verge of breaking through probably within the next 10 years of battery technology, where you're going to get great range and speed and convenience and quick recharging to where it's going to be a desirable vehicle.
Dial home.
Dial home. Hi, can you give me a call as soon as you get in, please? We got our samples in, and I just wanted to let you know they look great, and we can take a look at them this afternoon if you're available. Bye.
When Ford purchased Jaguar back in 1989, there were many people who thought that Ford would just swallow up the company and we'd probably see Ford-powered Jaguars. Well, we may see the opposite and see some Jaguar-powered Lincolns. To Ford's credit, they allowed Jaguar to develop their very first V8 engine. And the only Ford part in that 4-liter powerhouse is this Woodruff Key. Now, at the rear of the XK8, Ford did have its say. And what they told Jaguar is, the men and women who drive this car will probably golf, so make sure there's room for at least 2 sets of clubs in the rear. So be it. Now, I know what you're wondering. What's a Woodruff Key? Well, let's ask the man who should know, and that's Bill Gardner.
Well, Brad, you want to know about a Woodruff Key, do you? Well, we just happen to have a 5-liter Ford fuel-injected V8. We removed this engine from a station wagon that was in a pretty severe crash. The car was totaled. We knew the engine was in real good shape because we worked on it quite a bit previously. So we yanked the engine out and saved it, hopefully to install in another car. And with it out of the frame of the car, it's sitting on this skid here today, we can see pretty well the location we want to talk about. This would be a difficult shoot to do in the car. In any case, the Woodruff Key has a number of functions. First of all, it synchronizes the harmonic balancer to the front of our crankshaft for purposes of balancing. And as we go in a little bit closer and have a look at the harmonic balancer, you're going to see the need for synchronization. And remember, it's the Woodruff Key that keeps the harmonic balancer synchronized to the engine's crankshaft. If you look at the balancer over here, you can see that it's fairly narrow. And as I begin to turn the crankshaft, you can see a thicker, wider portion of the balancer come into view. You can see that it extends all the way around. And as I keep turning it, you'll see there's the narrow section coming up again. So it's important that we synchronize the balancer to the crankshaft to keep the engine from vibrating like crazy. Now, as I turn it a little bit further, you can see a scale coming into view over here. That's the ignition timing scale. These hash marks that you see along here, and I've highlighted with a piece of yellow crayon, I've highlighted the 10-degree mark. When that 10-degree mark comes up and lines up with that pointer right there, that's our basic or initial timing setup on this engine. We'd establish that with a strobe light with the engine running at idle speed. Now, it's important, of course, that that timing scale and this mark is synchronized with the crankshaft as well. Otherwise, our timing, we'd never be able to correctly or properly establish our ignition timing. And once again, it's that little Woodruff Key that keeps this whole business synced to the crankshaft properly. Okay, I've installed a harmonic balancer puller on the front of this engine. It's pushing against the nose of the crankshaft, and the puller is slowly drawing the balancer off. You can see it moving out towards me right now. And it's going to pull this balancer right off. Remember that the balancer is an interference or friction fit on the front of the crankshaft, so we need to use a puller like this to get it off. Now once we get it off, you're going to see the Woodruff Key, and you're going to see the groove in the harmonic balancer and the corresponding groove in the crankshaft. And the Woodruff Key is a friction fit in both of those. Now it's just about ready to come off. There it is now. Okay, now that we've pulled the harmonic balancer off the front of the crank, it's a little bit easier for us to see where that Woodruff Key would go. There's the groove that the Woodruff Key is going to engage with. Right there, that little slot right there extends all the way through our balancer to the front. And the Woodruff Key is half in that groove and half in the corresponding groove in the crankshaft, keeping the two perfectly synchronized. And for obvious reasons. You can see the counterweight to this balancer, so it has to be synced. And If we look over here, the timing scale. Again, it must be synced to the crank, and it's that little groove and the little Woodruff key that are keeping the two in sync. Well, there's our much talked about Woodruff key, that tiny, insignificant looking little steel key that's nestled in the groove, in its groove in the crankshaft right now. I'm not going to disturb it and pull it out because there's a good chance we could fumble it into the engine crankcase. We haven't taken the front cover off. Now, if you were doing something like replacing a timing chain or the timing sprockets, that's the time when this would be removed quite possibly and then reinstalled. And if you're real lucky and play your cards right, maybe you'll never see the Woodruff key on your engine. Now, you want to know something? I could probably have this Ford V8 apart today, have that Woodruff key in my hand, and have the Jaguar engine apart tomorrow and not even realize that that was a shared part. It's that small and that insignificant. But as you've seen here today, it's a very important part to synchronize other items on the engine, and without it, we'd be in big trouble. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 97.
What's our biggest pollution problem? New cars? Old cars? Or that factory over there? That's coming up next on Kenzie's Corner. Ontario is becoming the second province after British Columbia to introduce mandatory emissions testing on all cars. The theory, of course, is that if we all keep our cars perfectly tuned, there'll be less pollution in the air. Well, the environment, the ecology, yada-da, who can argue with that? I mean, nobody wants clean air more than I do. But I wish the governments would get out of the face of the car owner. I mean, in the last 20 years, exhaust emissions have been reduced over 90%, and we've paid big time to make that happen. Now, there's a couple of questions that have to be answered about emissions testing. First of all, will it work? Will the threat of fines or having your car taken off the road be enough to force people to tune up the car? And if they do, will it actually reduce the amount of emissions produced into the atmosphere? Well, I'll take a lot of convincing on that. First of all, new car emission systems are warranted for 5 years. Chances are any car up to that age will be in compliance or near enough as to make no difference. As for older cars, well, they can only be expected to meet the standards of the year that they were built. If they were trying to force all cars to be retrofitted to current standards, it'd be so expensive, you'd be basically consigning half of the cars on the road to the landfill, and that's hardly an environmentally acceptable solution. Now, the idea of emissions testing started in the United States, where they have a big problem with misfueling, people putting leaded fuel into unleaded cars. That ruins the catalytic converter and basically destroys the emission control system. We don't have that problem in Canada because all our gasoline comes from a handful of refineries. There's basically no leaded fuel available. The second question that has to be asked is emissions testing the best way to spend limited resources on the pollution problem? I say not a chance. When I see factories spewing sulfur by the ton into the air or diesel trucks with carbon soot blowing out their tailpipes, I say, hey, listen, when industry and diesel trucks have reduced their emissions by 90%, then you come whining back to the car owner, but not until. From the Big Smoke, I'm Jim Kenzie.
When we first got word that Jaguar was about to create its first sports car since the XJS 21 years ago, I'm sure I was not the only one a little bit concerned that in an effort to satisfy today's consumer, Jaguar just might forget its past. And you know, in the past for many, Jaguar meant the XKE. Well, what we've discovered out here in California, that in the future, Jaguar could certainly mean XK8. Next week, Graham Fletcher will get behind this new cat on Test Drive. So make sure you join us as we continue to bring you more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
The thing is, be ultra careful. It's all too easy to fall into the trap that the car will get me out of anything, because this car feels like it can do anything. You feel like Superman in it.
TSN's Motoring 97 has been brought to you by Quaker State. The Big Q stands for quality, always has, always will, and Midas, the way it should be.